Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you from my little nutshell of infinite space right here in the Wood of the Holly under this sign. And I've got a really special guest on the other side of the digital divide today. This gentleman is a prolific author, one of the most important chroniclers of popular culture and all things La La Land. He's written a number of bestsellers, including The Castle on Sunset, which is about Chateau Marmont, Rat Pack Confidential. He wrote about Paul Newman, A Life, Jerry Lewis, King of Comedy, The Life and Art of Jerry Lewis, Dolce Vita Confidential. He also wrote and narrated a podcast about Lew Wasserman. He's a former film critic of The Oregonian. He's written for Sight and Sound, Film Comment, the New York Times, the LA Times. He's here with me today on the other side of this little Zoom space. That's Shawn Levy to talk about his latest literary offering, Clint, about none other than Clint Eastwood. Welcome.
Thanks so much. Wow, what an introduction. I'd almost like to meet that guy.
I read the book, and as a quick, I don't want to say review, but referral, check it out, folks. First question for you, Shawn. 2 words. Why Clint?
I go into every biography with a couple of thoughts. One is there a story here? There's a chronicle. Every life is a chronicle. I think of it as a clothesline. It connects 2 walls and it's a line. And it's what hangs off the clothesline that makes a book possible. And in Clint's case, there's Hollywood superstardom. There's becoming a director. There's the independent. It's funny, he's released his movies with Universal and Warner Brothers, but really he's an indie filmmaker. You can talk about the Western and the image of American masculinity. You can talk about politics. You can talk about business. He's an entrepreneur. He owns Pebble Beach golf links. And of course, his personal life, which is very tangled and spiky and sometimes sensational. So I knew there was a whole book. And it was a long time before I could find the way to do a book about him. I had the idea after I wrote about Paul Newman, and I thought he'd make a nice counterweight. Mm-hmm. And there was a Clint book coming out at the time, and that was 15, 16 years ago now. So he's continued to work. He's had sensational successes and incidents occur to him in these years, and I felt it was still time.
Well, the thing about Clint, as I look at his life or lives, it's not almost what the world tells us about Clint, but Clint tells us a lot about our world. He's kind of a cipher, specifically with issues around masculinity and violence. And in my view, it's kind of an evolving project. It's not maybe the Harry Callahan is maybe not the same cat who directs and is in Unforgiven.
There's a truism about him that he made his reputation in Hollywood. He made his way to the top of the ladder committing acts of violence. And he has spent 30 years making movies about how awful it is to commit acts of violence, whether you're a soldier or a lone gunman or someone who is in an accident and takes a life. And that's really interesting. But when you look at those 2 characters that he became famous playing, the man with no name and Harry Callahan, it's clear now that those are damaged guys. They live alone. They have no one around them. They get no pleasure. They kill, and it costs them. I think it took him 15, 20 years playing that type of character to find a way to address that. But I think it's always been there. And I think when you see that about him, the whole question of what does masculinity mean as embodied by Clint Eastwood starts to wobble a little bit.
Of course, his stardom emerges really, it's almost coincidental with the catastrophe of Vietnam for America. I don't know where he weighed in on all those issues at that time, but he reflects it in his own way, in my view.
Yeah, he doesn't take on international issues so much as he does issues of law and order. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of cops, a lot of the Westerns that he made as a director and starred in are about righting wrongs, vengeance. If not vengeance, then like addressing an imbalance.
Right, he's kind of an avenging angel. I think Outlaw Josie Wales, I consider that to me maybe one of his It's clearly one of his best movies. He finds justification in vengeance. You know, you mentioned a movie in your book that he didn't make, but I think it was his father's favorite movie that I think is a masterpiece directed by Howard Hawks, and that is Sergeant York, which also does a deep dive into violence. Sergeant York, or Alvin York, has to contemplate whether or not to join the army in World War One. And I kind of feel like that movie, in a way, informs Clint, you know, as he moves through his career.
Absolutely. And in fact, his most commercially successful film at the box office is American Sniper, which is a version of the Sergeant York story. Another based on truth story. Both of them are based on truth. This one about Chris Kyle, who was said to be the American sniper with the most confirmed kills in military history. And he's really good at his job and he takes it very seriously. He's taking lives and saving lives, and it costs him his soul and his sanity.
Yeah, and that's what violence does. Even if you survive physically unscathed, it takes a bite out of you. You know, as I was reading your book, I thought, okay, let's take a look at Rawhide. Let's see that first episode of Rawhide. And I was watching it. I loved the song. And as I looked at it, it reminded me, it was kind of a knockoff of my favorite Western of all time. And I want to talk about Westerns, and that is Red River.
In fact, the fellow who, the showrunner basically of Rawhide, based the ideas in part on the same historical documents that Howard Hawks, screenwriter, whose name won't come to me while we're chatting, used to make Red River about 12 years prior. They got Mutiny out of the Bounty,
exactly,
the Bounty out of the material, and Charles Warren, who created Rawhide, got a saga that could be on TV for 217-hour-long episodes.
Oh my God.
All of Clint's films put together are probably not 217 hours.
Well, one of the things that you noted in your book that really struck me as someone who's been an actor, and I prayed for this opportunity, and it has not happened, is the fact when you're on a series, you get to make friends with that camera. It becomes non-existent. You get to trial and error and see and get a level of relaxation while the film is moving behind the lens. When I directed my own movie, I really wanted the thoughts to happen while the film was moving, not in rehearsal and not after. I wanted it during. And I felt like he had just like the most perfect apprenticeship on that TV series.
Yeah, as an actor and as a filmmaker, because he was raised during the Depression and his dad taught him, be versatile, don't do one thing, do a bunch of things well, work cheap for the first job so they can see what you do. And he wanted to direct while he was on Rawhide because he didn't know if acting was going to pan out for him. And he studied what different directors did. They had dozens of directors over those 200 plus episodes. And he learned about the camera and the lenses, and he went into editing suites. Even when he was a film, an acting student at Universal in the mid 50s, he was permitted to wander the studio and go on sound stages and just get a sense of the industrial production methods that served him later as a producer and a director. And in a way, Rawhide is his film school, even though he never shot a frame.
They never gave him an episode.
No, he was the second banana on a Western during the time Westerns were starting to fade.
Right.
Yeah. Nobody thought this kid deserved anything.
Yeah, well, he kind of looked like, I'm comparing it to Red River. He looked a little bit, maybe, was he the John Ireland part, or was he, the Montgomery Clift? I'm not sure where he fit in the paradigm.
I mean, he had accomplished nothing except get cast on Rawhide, and he's great on Rawhide because you can see him just steal every scene by doing nothing. The precept he learned as an acting student in the heyday of method acting was don't just do something, stand there. And by keeping still, he learned how to be emotionally and physically expressive.
Talking about acting for the cinema is one of the hardest things to do is have faith that thought communicates. When you're thinking, you're active without, physical activity generally. And getting faith in that is really, where you see these great, great stars, the actor studio. What was they say? What was the thing? Less is more. Actually, I think the corollary is truer: is more is less. But that's a debate. He seemed to have found that, and the only way you can do that is getting hours and hours in front of that camera.
Yeah, I agree. And I think he would agree that he learned both of his trades, movie making and movie acting, by going and punching a clock effectively on a 30 weeks out of the year making that show.
Yeah, there's a lot of falsehoods or false conceptions about working Hollywood. The truth is, people work really hard. They get up really early, and directing a movie and even acting in one, it's not a party. It's work. It's hard labor. And I felt like he understood that, just like Woody Allen understood that.
I think that people who've made long careers out of it, one thing about the movie business that a lot of people don't understand is it is to this day a union business. And unions don't get involved in people musing about the sky or, scientists, obsessively chasing a data point. They get involved in labor. So there's a lot of labor in a movie. And I think Clint, he lives in his body. I think that appealed to him. Oh, these guys, they work. His crews come back again and again, I think, because he respects a hard day's work, and they know that.
Another thing about Clint, for me, is what he represented in terms of masculinity. And he's not, there's this sort of kind of a character or archetype of masculinity that's not confessional. That's not really all about their feelings. It doesn't mean they don't feel. They're just not compelled to share them, and they live underneath. And that's sort of like, I think of like actors that I admired, like Sterling Hayden and others. And Clint, I feel to some extent, is that.
Yeah, he's born in 1930. He was raised during the Depression and World War II. He served in the military in the early 50s. He's definitely a beast of a generation, not quite the greatest generation. The war ended when he was like 14 or so, but of the same values. White Anglo-Saxon, long pioneering stock. He reminds me in his body of a cross somewhere between Abraham Lincoln, Jimmy Stewart, and Mickey Mantle, and he could be the fourth in that bridge game, and there's good and bad things about that. I think, ironically, it has given him a position to sort of stand in the middle and swivel around and comment on American culture as a filmmaker in a way that someone like Scorsese or Spielberg, who comes from a more specific subculture, can't, or has to struggle more to find a path to. So Clint can make a movie like American Sniper or like Sully, about the forced water landing of the passenger jet in the Hudson. He can make two movies about the battle for Iwo Jima, one in English, one in Japanese, because he's kind of detached and yet in the middle. It's a very interesting angle he comes to us from.
He's from Oakland, actually a place within Oakland, because I went to UC Berkeley, and my roommate was from Piedmont.
Yeah.
And I remember once he invited me to dinner, and I was like, I am in the heart of white people land here in Piedmont, very waspy, very white little enclave. Robert McNamara was from Piedmont, famously Kennedy's Secretary of Defense, an architect of the Vietnam War. I don't know how much that upbringing informed his life. I think he's more of a rebel in a certain kind of a way.
But he's rebelling from that. And he knows it. It's in him. He finished school in Oakland, and by the time he was in high school, he had discovered a thing that is with him to this day that sets him apart and informs his aesthetics, his filmmaking methods. He was a boogie-woogie piano player, and he loved to go to jazz clubs.
Right.
And he and his buddies would jump in hot rods and go all over the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland, a bunch of other towns, San Jose. They even went to Los Angeles to Central Avenue and the scene that was happening there. And as an actor and a director, Clint favors early takes. Rarely do his films get to a third take. And to me, that's a jazz lover. We're doing collective improvisation here. If we think that the first take is going to be real, we're going to film it and use it. And actors find that they don't have to exhaust or spare themselves some emotional depth because they know they're only going to have to do the thing twice.
And they're also going to be prepared.
Right, right. And they love it. They love it. And look at the work since 2000, since the year 2000, Mystic River gets Oscars for Sean Penn and Tim Robbins, Unforgiven in 92 for Gene Hackman, Million Dollar Baby for Hilary Swank and Morgan Freeman. These people have all made great movies. And this is the one where their peers said, wow, you brought up another level. And often it was their first stab at the line.
Right. And it also allows Clint to go play golf at the end of the day.
He respects the work day. He expects the day to end. Remember, he's a union. He's sympathetic to union workers, and yeah, if we get the day's work done, that one of the perks is that you get to enjoy yourself.
I learned a lesson when I directed my movie, The Solar Opposite. I remember Chris Maloney, who played the lead. I'm directing a movie. I can go forever, but guess what, Bill? The others can't. This isn't their big chance in the world. They're not running on the same nuclear fuel that you are. So rather than have an exhausted actor, shut the day down, get fresh tomorrow. You're going to live with these scenes for the rest of your life, and make sure that they're refreshed. And you're not here to beat the shit out of people. You're here to tell a story. And I feel like Clint understood that.
Understands. I mean, he had a movie last year.
I know.
Studio production.
I
Good
know.
movie too. Juror Number 2, a courtroom thriller with it gives a little vibe of 12 Angry Men.
Sidney Lumet, another great movie.
Yeah.
Yes, there's so much to admire about Clint, but he was also at the cutting edge of some cultural divides, critically and otherwise. The whole Harry Callahan. If you go back and you're quoting her just all through the book, Pauline Kael was not a fan and, was quick to criticize.
Yeah, she waged war on him. It's an interesting little battle. Dirty Harry was originally supposed to be set in New York. Frank Sinatra was going to appear in it, but he injured his hand and had surgery and got scrapped. So Clint Eastwood and Don Siegel, his second mentor after Sergio Leone, decide to make it but move it to San Francisco. And if you set a movie about justice and crazy behavior and policing in San Francisco in 1971, you're inviting the culture wars.
Right.
You could do that in New York, but in San Francisco, that's all that you're doing. And it happened that Pauline Kael was also from the Bay Area. So Clint, in fact, lived there his whole life. She left and became a New Yorker and then lived in Massachusetts, I believe. So they didn't agree politically. They didn't agree aesthetically, although she has nice things to say about Dirty Harry. She just ultimately calls it fascist. And then she goes to town on him. She uses him as an excuse for many one-liners and really brutal insights that are nevertheless are insights for years in the New Yorker. And she cherry picks. She doesn't talk about Escape from Alcatraz or Honky Tonk Man or White Hunter Black Heart or Bird. She talks about the gorilla, the orangutan movies and the Dirty Harry movies. So yeah, lady, you're not wrong, but get into a fight with someone who can fight back.
Well, Clint can fight back, so he
didn't.
He didn't need to. Do you think her criticism was fair?
I think that there are. Someone said this about, I can't remember which politician, but it's like, I'm not saying that he's fascist. I'm saying that fascists think he's fascist. And I feel that way about Dirty Harry. I don't know. The politics of that movie are more complex the more you look at it. But when I see the people who embraced it, the Philadelphia police, Richard Nixon, I'm thinking, wow, in 1971, I was not on their side personally.
No.
So I think she's right about that. I also think she's dead wrong about what kind of actor and director he is. She doesn't see the internal energy that he lets dissipate at the skin. It's almost like he's vaporizing his emotions. He's not giving it voice to them, he's not emphasizing them. And for her, that makes him a cold fish. She liked Marlon Brando. She liked Rod Steiger. Okay, well, I don't put capers in my salad. That's
Right.
taste.
Right. Well, she also embraced Bonnie and Clyde, which was her review famously helped keep it alive, as I recall.
Well, she for sure. What's interesting is Clint's movies, the spaghetti westerns, which were more violent, were made before Bonnie and Clyde, but for legal reasons didn't appear in the US until after.
Right.
So the Sergio Leone films might have kicked open those same doors to depictions of violence first. And it would have been very interesting to see what would have happened to Bonnie and Clyde if it was the fourth movie like that instead of the first that Americans saw.
Interesting. And alternatively, Kevin Thomas loved him, at least in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and he has champions in Chicago, and Richard Schickel, Dave Kerr at the Chicago Tribune. Roger Ebert was a big fan of Clint Eastwood. I think that he's been treated fairly at the New York Times. Once they kind of settled on film critics in the mid 70s, I think since then, Ken Turan at the LA Times, he's always had critics in his corner. I
Yeah.
think it's because they recognize the quality of his work.
Yeah. The thing about the Bay Area, which, play misty for me, although that's a little bit south of the Bay Area, but it's still kind of in the larger area, Carmel or Monterey, and of course the Dirty Harry movies. Like, what did he feel about the counterculture that was on fire in the Bay Area? Whether it was Haight-Ashbury, whether I went to Berkeley, all this ferment. The Zodiac Killer was rampaging in the Bay Area when I was in junior high. I'm trying to think some of the other of Jim Jones, the assassination of Harvey Milk and Moscone. There's a lot going on in the Bay Area in that bracket of time, and maybe in some way those movies are a reaction to that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to make a movie about a cop going after crazies, you're not going to set that movie in Des Moines. It makes sense. That was the shorthand of San Francisco in the popular mind and in the mind of movie executives who funded these productions. San Francisco, yeah, a bunch of wackadoos. And, you had the Black Panthers, you had the Sudanese Liberation Army. They were like violent people. So that's perfect for Dirty Harry. He wasn't going to go to Vietnam. He just had to go to San Francisco.
Right. I went to Berkeley the semester after Patty was abducted, around the corner from my dorm. Yeah, it was all going on there. There was a sense of possibility and kind of craziness. And I think in some way those movies, are a reaction to that.
Certainly the impetus at the beginning of the films. I think later on, when the films become, more self-conscious, and 16 years passes between the first one and the last one,
Right.
it's another thing. But Clint's in Carmel. It's a good 90-minute drive.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little town where there were like two paved sidewalks, and the houses did not get street numbers until 2024. You had to go to the post office to get your mail. And he became mayor of the town because he just wanted to make a couple of little additions to a business, and people were like, no. So by wanting to build something, he was a radical leftist in the political algebra of Carmel of the 1980s.
Oh, okay. Because I was thinking more the opposite. So,
Right.
those in Carmel, he was considered a leftist, but I was under the mind that his sort of Republican point of view also had to do with regulations and to eliminate them, for his own ambitions in development and real estate, but also as just a general worldview. I thought that's why maybe, he found himself in alignment with Mitt Romney, and
on the national level, yes, that's the case. But on the level of Carmel politics, where he thought people should be allowed to eat ice cream on the sidewalk, and the city council didn't, he was the lefty. Like, they wanted everything to be as it was in 1910.
So there was kind of a sort of a reaction to, I guess, what today we would call wokeness or political correctness within that community? I'm not sure where
No,
it
no,
falls.
no. It was any kind of change. The most beloved mayor of Carmel prior to Clint Eastwood was a guy who said, "If you want change, don't vote for me."
Okay. So he had a vision of change in that community. And I think it seemed from what I could tell, he, was sincere in his efforts as a local politician. I think he lost his footing, as you described quite brilliantly, when he stepped onto the national political stage. Specifically, I think it was the Republican convention for Mitt Romney. That would be what, 208?
2012.
Or 12, right?
2012.
By McCain and then Romney, 12. It felt like at that moment, as I remember seeing it, that he had lost a step, that he was old, that he was maybe slightly, gone. But that wasn't the case.
No, no. He was ad-libbing. The entire speech was ad-libbed. He was
Yes.
reading off a teleprompter. He had not consulted with the campaign, with convention managers or the Romney campaign about what he was going to say or how long he would speak for. And on his way to the stage, he got the idea to grab a stool and use it as a prop and address it as if Barack Obama were sitting with him.
Right.
And, my partner is an actor and a student of acting. And when she saw it with me as we were working on this book, because we remembered it from 2008 and everyone's hair was on fire about, oh my God, what a disgraceful thing. And that man's crazy. You look at it now and it's like, oh, he's doing an acting exercise.
Right. It's an improv
convention. And he's giving Barack Obama credit for some of his policy choices. And he doesn't mention Mitt Romney for the first 10 minutes he's out there. And on the night, Pat Buchanan and Michelle Malkin on Fox News at least chewed over the possibility that Clint was a Democrat on stage to sandbag the Romney campaign. That's how bizarre the thing actually was. It's not what I remembered. I remembered something more incendiary and dogmatic.
Yeah, well, I think Clint kind of defies categories. He's libertarian. He's his own guy. He's not in really lockstep with anybody. One thing I wanted to say, you mentioned jazz, and I am a jazz player. And one of the scripts I wrote before another one that I mentioned to you is called Central Avenue. And it's about that jazz scene in the 50s and the demise of a street. And it's a story set against that world. And I tried so hard to get it to Clint. So
yeah, I mean, he made his jazz movie Bird, which is almost like an experimental film that he gets Warner Brothers to fund, a 2 hour and 40-minute movie about an avant-garde jazz musician who dies. And he casts in it someone who has never been a lead in a movie and barely has had 15 minutes total in a movie, Forrest Whitaker. And he makes exactly the movie he wants to make. And there's jazz music throughout his films, but that was his jazz movie. And he loved making it.
one of the things that caught me by surprise when I read your book, a detail, is that he meets Lenny Niehaus in the Army.
Yeah, his friend who was a jazz musician and did many, many scores and arrangements of other music for his films. They met when they were GIs at Fort Ord in 51, 53, in that era.
Yeah, I remember because when I played the clarinet, and when I still study, but years ago I had the Lenny Niehaus books, which were like instructions on improvisation, and they had solos. And okay, how do you do that? And I would go through the Lenny Niehaus book, and then I realized, wait a minute, he's works with Clint. And now I did not know that he was an Army buddy of Clint as well as David Jansen. I'll tell you, one of the anecdotes that knocked me out was that airplane flight from Portland to Seattle
to the Bay Area. Yeah, Clint survived the forced water landing of a military aircraft. Just he and a pilot were on it. They were coming back from Seattle to the Bay Area, 1952-ish. So Clint's like 22, and the electronics on the plane fail, and they run out of fuel, and they have to ditch the plane in the Pacific Ocean and swim to shore.
Near Point Reyes, as you described.
Yeah. 50 odd years later, he makes Sully about the forced water landing of a passenger jet in the Hudson River. And has there ever been a Hollywood filmmaker who survived one of those? There certainly hasn't been one who then went on to make a movie about that.
That's right. I know it didn't work out so well for Wiley Post and
Yeah.
the great
Rocky Marciano, Mike Todd.
yeah, right. Yeah, Buddy Holly.
Clint survived that. And similarly, Paul Newman, who I always compare to Clint, he was on a military ship toward the end of World War II in the Pacific, and his crew was assigned to go to another ship. Their pilot woke up that morning with an ear infection. They were grounded. Everyone from his squadron went to the other ship. That ship was hit that night by the worst kamikaze attack in the war. And only on the strength of someone's bad ear did Paul Newman not die on that ship.
Well, I think both of these guys, a lifeguard from Oakland and the son of a sporting goods store owner in Cleveland, if I'm correct, lived incredibly charmed lives.
And they both knew it. Clint, I ran across a clip the other day on TikTok of Clint accepting his AFI Life Achievement Award. And he talked about his luck. He says, I've worked hard, I've tried to be prepared, but I've been very, very lucky. And Newman, I mean, from the blue eyes to the not dying in the plane crash to being given a seat at the actor's studio when he was just there to help a friend audition, he always touted his luck.
Yeah, I remember one time I was in an elevator in New York and somehow I was in it with Paul Newman and I went, he's really short. I could probably beat him up. It's like, that's what I was like, he's small. I wouldn't feel that way about Clint, No,
Clint's like 6'3" ish. And Clint's been in the gym every day since Fort Ord.
Yeah, and I was not aware that he was a surfer and embraced surfing. And I was actually amazed that he didn't end up as one of those beach guys in those beach blanket movies, in the 50s.
He if it wasn't for Rawhide and the spaghetti westerns, he may well have.
Yeah, so he's lived an incredible life, and I take inspiration that he's still ticking. Paul was not as fortunate in terms of his longevity. I think I don't know how old Paul Newman was when
he was 83.
He was okay. Yeah, he was older. He was much older.
He lived the whole life. He, 40 and a bit.
Yeah, you would take that when you're 65. Wow, 83, great. Yeah. But if you're 82 and a half, you're going,
I get it.
Maybe we can work on an extension. We can talk about it. There should be some possibility. Shawn, you and I could talk about this stuff forever. And I feel your passion for Hollywood and, what's the great American export is or was movies. And, you're chronicling this industry. Frankly, right now, I'm extremely depressed about it. It's particularly the theatrical side of it. I can just tell you, I would play jazz in front of the boarded up Cinerama Dome on YouTube live, and inside of which is the probably the most important cinema, this ArcLight, and it's all boarded up. And I have the history of my grandfather, who was, like I said, a president of Warner Brothers back in the 60s. And, as someone who's written 10 scripts, I'm a little too depressed and sad about it to commit myself to that labor. It's partly why I'm doing this. I don't know what you're thinking about it all.
I mean, it's tough. On the other hand, it's easier to make your own movie today probably than ever. The technology costs nothing. Films have won prizes at Sundance, shot on iPhones, and their directors have gone on to direct the Best Picture and Director at the Oscars. So that looks like an easier path. What's gone is this collective experience and the centralized production. Of course, our attention is balkanized. No two of us streams the same thing, whether we're talking about music or cinema or peak TV or whatever you want to call streaming television. So yeah, it used to be a more centralized culture.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's dispersed in a way that can be exciting, but it also can be sad because we lost that, sitting around the fire, hearing the same story from the sage.
Yeah, well, Sunday I went. American Cinematheque had a 70 millimeter print showing at the Egyptian of Lawrence of Arabia, which I've seen countless times, but I feel like it's a religious experience for the cinema. And I like to stay in touch with the things that inspire me.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, like you just said, what was I talking about? Ballot box 13. That's get that out there. And like,
Yeah.
don't quit. Stay
I
out
mean,
there. And
this is the lesson of Clint Eastwood, 94. And he puts a movie out. Dude owns Pebble Beach, among other golf courses. He could have the time of his life,
yeah,
eat sushi and play golf, and he wants to make movies.
yeah, because I'll tell you, having directed one, it is a very thrilling and intense way to live. And when you finish film, as I have, you do have this postpartum kind of like nosedive. And my thinking for Clint is he doesn't want to ever experience that. So he just keeps
Oh,
going.
he loves it. There's a quote late in the book where this is in the 2000 aughts or tens, and he's passing the craft service table, the lunch area, on a film shoot during a working day, and there's pizzas. And someone says, "Hey, Clint, you want a slice?" And he looks at it and he kind of sneers and says, "No, thanks. I've got other movies I want to make."
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a joke, and it's not.
Well, my father is 93. He still goes to his job, which is radio, operates radio stations. I like I mentioned, I talked to Matthew Spector. His father's Fred Spector. He's still agenting at CAA.
Good
So
gosh.
if you can hang in there,
You know?
maybe you can keep going, and it does offer a little inspiration to me. The only lesson I learned is stay out of Clint's parking spaces.
Yeah. That's a beef. But it tells me something about the guy. Like as a biographer, like what's his essential nature? He's a loner and he's a filmmaker. He has been directing movies for more than 50 years and acting in them for 70 years. One reader of the book, one reader, A.O. Scott in the New York Times said, it's as if John Ford and John Wayne were the same guy. And that's who he is. He is a filmmaker. That's why it's the man and the movies. They are one and the same.
So, using a metaphor of the movies, as you've done this deep meditation on this man and his times, both interlocked, is there a rosebud sled somewhere in his psyche that maybe you could leave us with?
He makes a lot of movies about women and children being imperiled. He makes a lot of movies about fathers estranged from daughters. And as we know, he makes a lot of movies about loners who have a past where they were violent men or committed an act of violence or accidentally committed an act of violence. And add the jazz guy, the loner, and the kind of guy who did whatever he wanted. And you're starting to get the Rorschach of him, the ink blot, that the Venn diagram, that is Clint Eastwood's psyche.
So I'm seeing that sled, that iconoclastic sled, is engulfed in the flames of Xanadu. And Shawn, just a word to everybody: read the book, because it's not just about Clint. It's really about he's kind of a cipher and a mirror to our times in many ways, and not just our times, but a few generation of times. And it's a really terrific read. I look forward to deep diving into some of the other books, specifically Paul Newman. And as a stand-up comedian, you wrote about Jerry Lewis, which took me by surprise in a way. I don't want to deep dive into Jerry. I will tell you this. I used to hang out at the Friars Club with Milton Berle because I did a play with him and we were very close and he loved me. And there was, I don't know how, it had to be in the 90s or at some point. And Jerry had just had a heart attack. And like all those Jewish guys of that generation, he's usually followed by a triple bypass and a zipper. And they said, what happened? What happened to Jerry with the heart attack? And someone blurted out, they found a cure for muscular dystrophy.
My Jerry take is when I was working on that book, people would always ask three things. Why does he do muscular dystrophy? Why did he break up with Dean Martin? And why did the French love him? And the answer to all three is because he's an asshole.
Yeah.
But you need to read In on the Joke, my book previous to Clint, which is about the women pioneers of stand-up comedy. Chapters on Joan Rivers, Phyllis Diller, Elaine May, Moms Mabley, Minnie Pearl, some forgotten names. It's my stand-up book.
Oh, good. Well, it's very hard for a woman in stand-up because, people have a hard time dealing with that kind of aggressiveness and energy that a stand-up has. And it's a little bit like, well, I get a woman, Phyllis, and she had to kind of de-pretty herself in a way.
Yeah. This is
the acceptable.
This is the book. Moms Mabley, posing as an old lady when she's in her 20s. Minnie Pearl, college-educated Shakespearean actress, posing as a rube. Phyllis Diller, posing as a harridan. Joan Rivers, the girl next door. I'm so ugly, I need platinum. They all had to do that.
Yeah. Here's a little piece of trivia, and then I'm going to go. I saw Joan Rivers in a part with Burt Lancaster, or the John Cheever book, The Swimmer.
The Swimmer. Yeah, she plays an erotic girl who's like hitting on a guy, and are you married?
Yeah.
And she's very well cast, Frank Pierce.
Yeah, she was terrific. Hey, Shawn, really appreciate the chat, and congratulations on your scholarship and your productivity and helping shine light on a world that I live in and am frankly tormented by, as I have been since probably, before I could even think. So, folks, check out the book, Clint. It's a terrific biography. Again, thanks to Shawn. Till next time, namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that I mean namashaloha. See ya.